We're glad you're here. My name is Ayal Weiner-Kaplow. I'm a team member here at the iCenter. And thanks for coming for this webinar. And this, challenging is absolutely not the right word and inadequate, but I don't have anything else to say in this horrible time that we're in. But we're glad you're here for an educator's lens, putting the latest news in context. And I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Carl Schrag, who will be taking us through, sharing uh, what has been going on. We're all following, and Carl has an expertise, an awareness that we're excited to hear from with him. So Carl came into the field of Israel education via his first career in Israeli journalism. During his nearly 15 years living in Israel, he reported at some of the biggest, but also the smallest stories unfolding in the country. And after years of climbing the ladder at the Jerusalem Post, he served as the newspaper's editor before opting to apply the lens of journalism to help North American learners of all ages engage with Israel in multifaceted ways, which is how we got lucky to have Carl come to us here at the iCenter. When he's not collaborating with us, our iCenter colleagues, to build the field of education, he can be found teaching current events classes and making homemade jam, hosting family and friends, and spending quality time with his young grandson. And so this is Carl. We're all very excited, as I said. And before we get started, I'll share briefly that over the last week and a half, we've worked tirelessly to put together resources and ways to support you, the educators. And I'll share with them more in depth at the end of the session. But a quick preview is we have another webinar coming up in 2 days, aimed primarily at day school educators, supporting, that one will be more interactive. How can we support one another? We also have a webinar we did a couple of days ago, last week, the time blurs, and it's pre-recorded on our website about how to share, how to engage in age-appropriate ways with our learners in this difficult time. Finally, we are offering one-on-one consultations for free to any educator or teams of educators through the end of the week. Every setting, every school, wherever you are is unique. And we as our iCenter team are here to support and hopefully help you in custom ways. So all of that can be found on our website, and I'll share this at the end. No need to remember, the icenter.org/educator support. I'll reiterate in the end. But before I go on too much, Carl, take it away.
Thanks so much, Ayal. Hello, and thank you for being here at this most challenging time. As Ayal said, I tend to follow events from Israel, certainly in times of crisis, with a journalist's sensibilities. And I have found myself over these past 10 days trying to juggle between thinking as a journalist like I once was and thinking as an educator as I am today, as we all are that are here together. It's been 10 days since Israel awakened to a shocking and unfathomable new reality in which things that we knew could never happen were happening. We don't need to recount all of the details. We've all been living it for 10 days, but just a couple of thoughts. Seeing images or hearing reports of armed terrorists in pickup trucks in Sderot shooting automatic weapons at anything that moved. The horrific scenes at the Nova Festival in the desert, where 260 people were killed in cold blood and others were kidnapped into Gaza. The sheer brutality of the accounts relayed by kibbutz members in the Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope area, and the terrifying, unbridled hatred, the despondent faces of people being forced into captivity in Gaza. We've all been experiencing this in real time. Those of us in North America have the luxury of it not playing out on our home court. We also have the additional challenge of trying to parse, trying to understand things that are happening so far away. I imagine many of us have wept at the images of people who have died. We've gasped at the realization that so many, 200 or more men, women, children, even infants, are being held hostage in Gaza. In the words of one of my oldest and closest friend, speaking to me from his home in Jerusalem, he told me that he's overwhelmed by all the people who died. He said, our kids' friends and our friends' kids. Think about that for just a moment. We've all relished the stories of heroism, whether from the journalist Amir Tibon, whose retired general father rescued his son and his family and untold others in Kibbutz Nachal Oz, or the absolutely inspirational story of the chicken cooking, coffee serving Rachel, that lady in Ofakim, who, when she and her husband were trapped in their apartment with 5 Hamas terrorists, she played them for time while she signaled to special forces out the window. Special forces included her son. She signaled to them all the information they needed in order to storm the apartment, kill the terrorists, and liberate Rachel and her husband. We've all had multiple times where we've cried, we've been shocked, we've been at a loss for words, we've been unable to stop talking, and sometimes all of these things seemingly at the same time. All of us are dealing with these many emotions, with these many concerns, with these fears, with the personal, with the universal, with so many levels. And as educators, we're trying to take care of ourselves as we're constantly thinking about how we can try to take care of our learners, of our communities. If you're in a day school, if you're a synagogue educator, if you're a camp or a youth professional, if you're a synagogue rabbi, wherever, whatever your setting is, sometimes it's hard. We get mixed up between looking after our own needs and looking after the needs of people who are looking to us for support, for guidance, and for inspiration or understanding. Speaking just for myself, though I imagine not only for myself, trying to help others understand things that are so terrible, so big, so evil, dare I say so unprecedented, that I can't understand them myself, is so incredibly challenging. I want to encourage everybody, while we're here, put questions into the chat, put ideas or suggestions into the chat. If I talk about something or I mention something that you want more information on, put a question into the chat. If you've been doing something in your setting and you think it's working, type up a sentence or two, tell us about it. I will share it with everybody. If you've got a plan for a program or an activity today, tomorrow, or whenever, type it into the chat so that we can share and we can truly be a community of learners and teachers together. We've all seen such an incredible, gratifying outpouring of love and support from many quarters. Now, if you're a campus professional, you may be feeling like the balance between the love and support and the vitriol and the hatred is hard to hold at the same time. Nationwide, we're seeing polls here in the US showing an overwhelming majority of Americans sympathizing with Israel, supporting Israel's stated need to wage war against Hamas. Obviously, the tide will turn. The tide will turn as the images from the Nova Festival and from the kibbutzim near the Gaza Strip, as they are increasingly replaced by images of destruction and despair in Gaza City, the tide will turn. We're currently, with exceptions as noted, but we currently, broadly speaking, here in the US and in Canada, where there's a window, sounds terrible to put it this way, there's a window of sympathy. Cynical as that sounds, and I hate using that phrase, but that window of sympathy will close. Those polls that show such strong, widespread, widely felt support for Israel, all of that will change. Because even though the magnitude of what transpired in Israel on Shabbat, on Simchat Torah, 10 days ago, even though it's unprecedented in Israel's history, we've seen these scenarios before. They follow a sick, painful, and seemingly preordained arc. Tomorrow, President Biden will land in Israel on a solidarity wartime visit. I'll admit, yesterday when I heard that Prime Minister Netanyahu had asked President Biden if he would come visit, it sounded from the way the White House was hemming and hawing like the president had no intention of getting on a plane and flying halfway around the world right now. But at the end of the 8-hour marathon meeting of Israel's war cabinet that ended at 2:30 this morning, Israel time, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken participated in that cabinet meeting, at the end of that meeting, Secretary Blinken made the announcement that President Biden was on his way, or would be on his way. He's leaving today and arriving tomorrow. Honestly, thinking about and reflecting on the remarks and the actions made and taken by President Biden over the last 10 days, his televised comments last week, his 90-minute meeting with families of American citizens being held hostage in Gaza, the very honest and emotional and clearly sincere feelings of connection expressed by President Biden, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised that he's on the plane and on his way to Israel, arriving tomorrow. Other world leaders are traveling to Israel. I can't help but think that this outpouring of solidarity, whether it's the American president, the German chancellor, the Romanian president, and others will be coming. I can't help but think that these expressions of support, of sympathy, of solidarity, more than anything else, all of these are opportunities for us to open the door, for us to engage our communities in thinking about what Israel is undergoing and in what ways all of that resonates for the people in our communities. In my work and in our work here at the iCenter, we strive to relate to the news in ways that offer context, in ways that don't simply parrot whatever you could get by having a news feed from a newspaper or a news website or even social media pundits running on your computer, on your telephone, or on your other devices. Providing context to try to understand events as they're unfolding now can be incredibly important in powering meaningful, thought-provoking conversations that pretty much always should begin with checking in and seeing where our learners are, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how they're relating to the news as it's unfolding. as I noted before, anything that I can say here is reflecting my efforts to put sense into things that just don't make sense, things that just shouldn't be. I'm trying to do that for myself. I'm trying to help you navigate ways that you can do it for yourselves. And I'm trying to help you navigate ways that you can bring the news, bring the developments, bring the people to your settings. And I apologize in advance because all of this is inadequate. I think it goes without saying by this point that every single one of us should be reaching out to our people in Israel just to check in. It can be as little as the heart emoji, a 3-word message thinking of you. It can be anything. We need to do that, and we need to encourage our communities to do that. Across North America, there are schools and other organizations that are having people draw pictures, write cards, delivering messages of hope and of support to people in Israel, whether they're living on front lines, whether they've been evacuated from their homes, whether they are recovering from injuries, whether they are burying loved ones, knowing at a tremendously challenging and painful time such as this, that people in Israel are not alone, can make a huge, huge difference. We need to linger on the stories, both of the lives cut short and of the inspirational tales being told by everyday Israelis. You know, the pivot that we've made from 2 weeks ago, when so many conversations about Israel focused on whatever the government was planning for changes to the judicial system, when the focus of conversation was on how deeply divided the Israeli people were. If you want to talk about inspiration, if you want to be inspired, if you want to inspire the people that you work with, look at what Israelis are doing today. Look at the tens of thousands of people who are showing up en masse in every way imaginable. Look at the giant banquet facilities in Tel Aviv that have been turned into packing stations where people are bringing donations, everything from food and snacks and diapers and toiletries. People are packing care packages that are going to families, whether they've been evacuated from their homes in the area near Gaza, in the north of the country, near Lebanon, where the threat from Hezbollah is potent. Israelis are gathering supplies. They're delivering them all over. The stories that we're hearing, the stories that we can be sharing. One person told me just today that they heard a call go out. We need families to host evacuees. The person who told me the story took a half an hour before they reached out, and they were told, sorry, all of the evacuees that we know of have already been taken care of. They all already have a place to go. So he asked, how many evacuees are you helping? 6,000. Israelis are stepping up in ways that for some of us may seem difficult to wrap our heads around. For all of us can be an incredible, incredible source of inspiration. I talked about the importance of trying to put context to the news, trying to help people understand that what we're watching today, what we're watching unfold, whatever the developments are, they didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't start the minute I turned on my news feed. They didn't start, in this case, with the horrible reports last Saturday morning, 10 days ago. We can learn from history. We can reflect from history. The day before Hamas waged war on Israel, we marked the 50th anniversary by the Gregorian calendar of the Yom Kippur War. October 6th, 1973. This isn't the time to go into all of the details of what happened 50 years and 11 days ago, but just the Cliff's Notes version. The Israeli military, intelligence, and political echelons all were 100% convinced that after the stunning victory of the IDF in the 1967 Six-Day War, Arab armies would never dream of attacking Israel again. This underlying accepted concept fueled everything that the army did. It fueled everything that the government did. So it makes perfect sense. It's Yom Kippur. It's the eve of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Soldiers deserve to be home with their families. So thousands of soldiers were given leave for the holiday. They were sent home from their posts near the border with Syria in the north, from their posts near the border with Egypt in the far reaches of the Sinai Peninsula. There's no reason not to let them go home when you know, in quotes, that there's absolutely no chance of war. We know what happened. In the afternoon of Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria staged a well-planned, carefully orchestrated, two-pronged attack from the south and from the north. It was frightful. It was devastating. At one point, the defense minister, Moshe Dayan, was convinced that Israel could not hold its defenses, and this was the end of the Jewish state. Of course, it didn't play out that way. The IDF called up soldiers. It took time. They got them to the fronts. The airlift of American military support got started. The IDF turned the tide. And we know Israel survived. Well, on October 6th of 2023, 50 years to the day after that fateful attack, Israeli media were filled with all kinds of columns and analyses and pundits offering their wisdom, marking the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. I happened to catch one roundtable conversation between three military figures, former military figures, who were entertaining one question. Could what happened in Yom Kippur of 1973 happen again? Roughly 12 hours after I watched that conversation, we all got our answer. Now, lots of people, and many of you, I would imagine, have been asking, how could this happen? How could Israel have been caught so badly unprepared? How could this have taken Israel by surprise? What about the vaunted Israeli intelligence apparatus? What about? All those are valid questions. They're not questions to which we have answers. They're questions that our learners will certainly be asking. Call it punting, perhaps, but here's how I would answer. I would again go back to the precedent of 50 years ago. October 6th, Israel taken by surprise. 18 days later, ceasefires are in place. Israel, hurt, wounded, chastened, goes about starting to rebuild, starting to recalibrate. Part of that rebuilding and recalibration involved the appointment of a commission of inquiry headed by a Supreme Court judge to investigate, to conduct hundreds of interviews to find out, how did this happen? How could this debacle have taken place? That didn't happen on the 10th day of the war. It didn't happen while the war was underway. It didn't even happen the minute after the war had ended. Fast forward 6 months, and in April of 1974, Prime Minister Golda Meir, in the aftermath of the Commission of Inquiry's findings, Prime Minister Golda Meir resigned. The accounting will take place. The accounting will take place after the war is over. It will take place at the highest echelons, and it will be an inquiry that every person in Israel and millions more around the world who care about Israel will be following. They will be following every detail. And the hearings that are public, assuming there are some public hearings, surely will be fascinating. Presumably the most important of the hearings will take place behind closed doors. But that Commission of Inquiry will publish a report, and lessons, hopefully, will be learned. Thinking about what we can learn from history, thinking about the context that we can draw, and thinking about the incredible importance of finding rays of hope in this moment when, let's be honest, most of us are not feeling a whole lot of hope. And all of the inspirational stories of the heroes, large and small, that we're hearing about, they're beautiful. Thank God we have them. But they don't do a lot to help us manage the feeling of despair that we may be feeling, that our communities may be feeling, as we look at this reality that's unfolded, that's presented itself over these last 10 days. So I have no idea if this is even in the remotest way possible, but I've long held that anyone who cares about Israel and Israelis must strive to remain open to the possibility of peace, even when it seems like there's no way to get there. If we lose the ability to be open to the possibility just because we don't see how it could happen now, we lose a little bit of our humanity, and we damn nearly 10 million Israelis to continue to live in the unacceptable reality, the constant threat from the region in which they've lived for 75 years, that threat that became so starkly front and center 10 days ago on Shabbat and Simchat Torah. So it may be one of the hardest things that we all have ever done. It's also one of the hardest things that I think we all must do for ourselves, for our own humanity, and for our communities, our students, our learners, our participants, whatever your setting is. I believe that staying open to the possibility that peace may come, and that it will require sacrifices from all sides, that may be one of the most important things that we can do. It might be the most important thing that we can do at this time. So I want to turn to history to try to inspire myself, to try to convince myself that I'm not just grasping at straws. And maybe in the process, this will inspire you and convince you as well. So again, 50 years ago, that horrible Yom Kippur War, where Moshe Dayan was running around saying, this is it, it's the end, we are defeated. The last thing anybody was thinking about in October 1973 was that 4 short years later, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat would journey to Jerusalem and set in motion a process that would lead to Israel's first peace treaty with an Arab state. Without all of the details, if anybody has questions, by all means, throw them in the chat. But the short version, it seems clear that Sadat never would have done this if not for the Yom Kippur War. After suffering a string of humiliating defeats at the hands of the Israelis, the Arab armies for the first time could point to a better performance on the battlefield. Now, it wasn't a victory for Egypt and Syria. Let's just remember that. But it was better than the catastrophe of 1948 or the setback of 1967. Sadat, it seems clear, parlayed that respectable military performance into making the case for accepting Israel as a reality and ending the state of war. Although the rest of the world, the rest of the Arab world rejected Egypt's moves toward peace and isolated the largest and what had been the most important country in the Arab world, Sadat's bravery, his decision to end the state of war between Egypt and Israel, changed the balance of power in the Middle East. Ultimately, it helped to pave the way to the growing number of Arab countries that today maintain normal ties with Israel. Maybe, just maybe, the horror that we're experiencing now will lead to changes in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel, in the Arab world, in the West, changes that will pave the way to a better future. We can't see it from our place of grief and shock and loss and anger today. And we need to remember it may not happen. But let's try, for our own sake and for the sake of everybody that relies on us in our communities, let's try to hold on to the hope that peace will come, that good will triumph over evil, and that this isn't how Israel is doomed to live forever and ever. There are so many resources in all of our communities, resources that we can share, resources that we can rely on and tap into. I'm thinking first and foremost about human resources. Whether you're at a school, a synagogue, or any other setting, are there Israelis in your community, either working as educators in professional roles, in support roles, or members of the community? Every one of those people have stories to share. You know your people. I don't know your people. You may want to approach people on the spot and offer them a platform. You may want to sit down and talk to them and help them think about how they can share their story, how they can share what they're thinking about. If there's a beloved member of your community who has deep connections to Israel and Israelis, by them sharing their perspective, they're opening the door for many others to feel connected. It can be hard when someone like us gets up in front of a group and starts to tell stories, whether they're personal stories or stories that have been relayed to them. It can be hard for a lot of people to feel a connection. when they hear it from their peer, when they hear it from their neighbor, when they hear it from someone that already they have an invested relationship with, that can help them start to think about how they connect to this story. If you have Shinshinim in your community, young Israelis just after high school taking a gap year to work in our communities across North America, share the request with them. Ask them to share their stories. Ask them to share what they're hearing from their families, from their friends, from their peers back home in Israel. Because every way that we can help people build personal connections to the reality of what's going on in Israel, and that reality includes horrific realities, but it also includes absolutely beautiful realities. And the more we can encourage people to share the kinds of stories that will help people in our community find their own personal meaning, their own personal connection, the more people are going to open their hearts, the more people are going to take heed of all of the urging that we view ourselves as one giant community in Israel, around the world, wherever representatives of our community reside. Those efforts to reach out to people, tap into those twinning relationships between your school and a school in Israel, a school in your partnership community, or a school that was in your partnership community 10 years ago that you haven't done anything with in the longest time. Reach out, dust off those email addresses, check in with those teachers, check in with whoever else you can think of, the people who you know, the people who you've got experiences with, the people with whom you have a personal relationship, even if it's an old personal relationship that you haven't been maintaining recently. Those people will be happy to hear from you. They'll be happy to hear from your learners. They'll be happy to hear from your community. And it will mean the world to them that you're thinking of them and reaching out. So there've been a number of questions in the chat or in the question mode, and I'm trying to address them as we go along. I would urge everybody, anything that is standing out, anything that you're thinking you want to try or you want some guidance on trying, please pop it into the chat or the Q&A mode. How can we contextualize all of this history for middle school learners as one example? Look, if your setting is not already engaged in teaching of Israel history, put away the fire hose. There's nothing to be gained by trying to, we could say, make up for lost time, or we could say by trying to fill people in on however many years of history, whether the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years, 4,000 years. You're not going to be able to do that on one foot. What you can do is try to tap in to some of the events in history, as I've tried to do here, that can draw parallels. You can make use of maps. You can use the stories that maps tell. And if you visit, and I believe that Ayal in a couple of minutes will be providing some tips on some links on our website here at the iCenter, and you will be able, I hope, you'll be able to tap into some of the resources that we have. You can consider the stories that maps tell. You can consider the stories that you can share with your learners through some of the visual tools available at the iCenter.org, through some of the tools that you will find elsewhere online. And you can do it by helping to share the stories. You can do it by trying to help them share the stories of the people in your community who are living all of this reality on a day-to-day basis. Many of your learners are consuming some form of news and updates 24/7 on their phones. Last week, it was very common in a lot of educational circles that we travel in for there to be messages going out. Consider taking away your children's devices. Consider encouraging them to delete TikTok, to delete Instagram, because of some of the horrible, horrible images that are being pushed out, whether by Hamas, whether by anybody else. You may be able to exercise some degree of control over what your own personal children or your young learners, participants, what they're watching, what they're viewing, what they're seeing, but they're watching and they're viewing and they're seeing. And when they bring questions or when they bring examples or when they express whatever they're expressing about what they're watching and how it's making them feel, without the need to share the videos in your setting, there's definitely room to meet them where they are and to try to help provide a little bit of the bigger picture. So if we're encouraging you and we're encouraging you to encourage your communities to get off some of the most painful and most graphic sources of social media, how do you keep up with the news? Not surprisingly, American media outlets are all over the events in Israel and Gaza over the last 10 days. As we say in the news business, if it bleeds, it leads, and violence gets coverage. Yes, we wish that all of the wonderful things that are going on in Israel on any given day were being reported on a regular basis. We wish they were on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and all of the other remaining major news outlets here in the US. We wish that that was what 60 Minutes was focusing on. We wish. But right now, you're getting lots of coverage. You're getting lots of perspectives from opinion columnists. All of these kinds of things can help you keep up. They can help members of your community keep up. There are a remarkable number of English language news sources on the web, in podcasts coming out of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, Haaretz, Yediot Achronot has its English language website. It's almost all translated from the Hebrew, some of it better, some of it worse, but Yediot Achronot is one of the best sources of opinion columns, of breaking news. All of those are available to you. And with the exception of Haaretz, which is behind a paywall, the others are all readily available to you. An endless list of podcasts. And when you go to our website and you look at some of the resources we're recommending, they include ways to access some of the podcasts that are providing up-to-the-minute reporting on and reflection on so much of what is happening? How can we create, another question, how can we create space for nuance when emotions are running high in response to complex world events? We can provide space by doing all the things that we do as educators. We can provide space. We can provide space by maintaining standards for interacting respectfully, for listening and speaking. We can provide space for conversation, for questions. We can provide space by bringing in the right kind of voices, depending on where you're intending for the conversation to go or where you want the conversation to go. All of these ideas and much more were addressed in the webinar that we hosted last week with Leanne Matlow, which again, when Ayal points you to the resources on our website, the recording of that session is there. Another one, I really need help responding to my students and clients that keep calling Israel an apartheid state, or showing them how the term ethnic cleansing is also false. When you're engaging with people who are throwing around words that they may or may not understand what they actually mean, if they're willing to listen, you should always be willing to talk. You should always be willing, and you should try. And sometimes it's incredibly hard, especially when we are so emotionally wrapped up in everything that is happening at this time. But when you find that you're engaging with someone who's repeating back to you something that they heard or they read or they saw, you can explain. And I think it's important for us to remember that we're educators. It's not our job to justify everything that Israel has ever done or everything that any Israeli has ever said. There are others who may feel that that's the realm they want to fill. There's legitimate criticism of Israel. Any of us who try to deny that there's legitimate criticism of Israel will find that we're going to run into trouble very quickly. Legitimate criticism of Israel, legitimate criticism of how Israel relates to the 21% of its citizens who are Arabs, legitimate criticism of the way Israel has managed affairs in the West Bank and in Gaza since the Six-Day War, legitimate criticism of the way Israel has managed all of the land, sea, and air entry and exit points from Gaza since soon after the disengagement in 2005, there are many a conversation to be had around all of those things. And if someone is willing to step away from some of the inflammatory language, ethnic cleansing, Holocaust, apartheid, all of which are awful, none of which have happened in Israel's relating to Palestinians and to Arabs anywhere in the region at any point in the last 75 years. What wisdom from Jewish texts or Jewish values can help contextualize how we respond to challenging current events? Katonti, as we say. There is a wonderful thought piece by my friend, my colleague, Rabbi Jan Katsu, that we posted on our website. I keep promoting or promoting, Ayal, the fact that I'm about to hand over to you so that you can walk people through some of the things that are on our website. But Rabbi Jan Katsu wrote an essay, a thought piece that inspired me, and I expect it'll inspire many of you as well. One last question. When issues feel overwhelming, how can we empower students to find voices and play a positive role in the world? Give them an opportunity to share what they're thinking, create for them a brave space in which they can explore questions, they can explore what the big and small issues mean to them and how they connect to them. Help them find ways to connect to those big and small issues. And that, again, look for people who can provide that human connection. Shinshinim in your community, they're 18 years old. They are enthusiastic. They are smart. They are charismatic, and they are passionate. Get them in front of, get them with your learners. Look to official representatives of the government of Israel in your community. Look to shlichim in your community. Look to diplomats in your community. Look to members of your community who visited Israel last summer. Thousands and thousands of teens visited Israel on Route 1 affiliated trips last summer. Some of them are in your synagogue. Some of them are in your school setting. Some of them are members of your youth group. Invite them to share their story. They all met Israelis. I hope they're all in touch with those Israelis. They all met people. Ask them what they're saying to their friends in Israel. Ask them what they're hearing from their friends in Israel. Challenge your community to think about what role, small or large, they can play in raising awareness, in helping people engage, and in helping people find their own personal meaning. I'll leave you with that challenge that I struggle with myself. But I think it's incumbent on every single one of us to remain open to the possibility that peace will be possible. I'm not going to get into all of the details of Israel's war against Hamas. Can Israel finally this time eliminate Hamas, remove Hamas from power, remove all of the evil that has powered Hamas over these years? It's hard for us today when we're looking evil in the eye. It's incredibly hard to think forward to that time when peace will be possible. But I challenge all of us, and I hope you'll challenge everybody you engage with to try as best they can to remain open for that possibility so that when circumstances change, each and every one of us will be ready to step up with open hearts and wide open eyes to embrace it and do everything we can to help bring peace. Thank you all very much. I think Ayal is going to close us out.
Wow. Thank you, Carl. And I'll share for everyone, even if, of course, if
Ayal, you're muted.
I hope I can be heard now. Am I heard, Carl? Great. Before the session, you shared some of the brief outlines, and I'm, as usual, amazed and processing everything we just talked about. Thanks so much for sharing your insights, ideas, answers to the questions. And we hope you came out of this with ideas of, as individuals, how to process the news out of Israel, to grow your understanding, delve into the nuances of the situations, and understand possibilities for the days ahead. And as educators, we hope you came away with ideas and increased confidence in ways to help your learners and your communities engage with the ever-changing news in impactful and personal ways. And I would argue, most importantly, engaging them with ways to strengthen their personal connections with Israel and Israelis. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of resources for you on our website. I'll go through very briefly since we want to respect time and we're towards the end. On our website itself, the iCenter.org, you'll come to this main page. And way up here at the top, Educating at a Time of Crisis, all you have to do is click Learn More, and you'll be taken to the page where, as I mentioned, you can schedule a consultation for you or others you're learning with, you're working with, learning with, whatever is the relevant situation, and you can sign up for a time that's convenient for you. We have an upcoming webinar, again, on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, about navigating the challenges for educators in day schools. If you're not a day school educator, you are also welcome to sign up, but just know that it will be geared towards day school settings. But as all education, it's very often relevant and overlapping with many different settings. And that'll be with Dr. Leslie Littman, Dan Tater, iCenter team member, and myself. And as Carl mentioned, we have some thought pieces, a recording from a previous webinar about speaking with our kids about what's going on in Israel, both now and in the coming days. And one of my favorites, resources that we've curated from many different organizations putting out great materials for all different ages, for all different settings. And not to worry, all this will be sent out to you in an email following the webinar, so no need to try to rush and remember everything. And that's what we've got for you. Again, thanks for coming, and b'hatzlacha in the days to come. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.